Welcome to our third and final video on the topic weathering and mass wasting. In our first video or first presentation, we looked at the concept of weathering and associated concepts. We also looked at, in detail, at physical or mechanical weathering. In our second video presentation, we looked at chemical weathering and biological weathering. We also looked at how rock type influences the rate at which weathering occurs and how climate influences the rate at which weathering occurs. Now, this, our final video, will focus on mass movement. When we looked at the concept of mass wasting or mass movement, we said that it includes rock fragments and soil being washed or moved downslope under the influence of gravity. We're going to be focusing on these two types of mass movement: soil creep and landslide. Now, most of us are familiar with landslide, which is the sudden movement of rock or soil downslope under the influence of gravity. But you may not be familiar with soil creep. Now, as the word suggests, soil creep. It's a very slow movement of soil downslope. It is slow, but generally it is continuous. Not something that we would actually see happening, but we will identify evidences in the environment to suggest that soil creep occurs. Now, what are some of the causes of soil creep? Here are some causes. Temperature change causes soil particles to expand and contract. Hence, they shift the position downslope. Remember, we looked at temperature change when we looked at physical weathering, right? So temperature change can also cause soil particles to expand and contract, moving them downslope. Human activities can also influence soil creep. Human activities such as construction of roads and buildings. Actions by boring animals can also influence soil creep. Rainfall can also cause soil to become wet and compact, and then when dried, loosens it up, shifting it downslope. So rainfall can also cause soil creep. Moving vehicles and earth tremors, such as earthquakes or volcanic eruption, can also result in soil creep. As mentioned earlier, unlike landslide where we can see the sudden movement of the soil or rock fragments, with soil creep we don't notice it unless we see certain evidences, and that's what we're looking at. Now, soil creep is taking place on this slope. We know that because there is curved tree trunk. So the soil is being slowly moved, resulting in the bending of the tree trunk here. This fence was not built like this. When it was just built, it was straight. Now what we find is that the movement of soil over time resulting in the tilting of this fence or broken retaining walls. Tension or cracks in roads can also be as a result of soil creep. Now, picture your school environment at St. James High School. Are there evidences of soil creep? Most definitely. If you should take a walk down the steps to the grade 10-11 block and turn around and look, you will notice that some of the retaining walls, they are broken. If you should also go down to the entrance at the library and look at the retaining walls there, you will also find that the retaining wall is being braced forward. Also, you will notice the bend or the curve in the tree trunk there. Evidence that soil creep is actually taking place on our school property. These two photographs also show evidence of soil creep. Notice the soil here resembling ripples in a pond. These are known as terracets, and this is because the soil is slowly moving downslope. Also over here is another example of the tilted fence where this is a prime example, a typical example across the island of Jamaica, where we see this, we know that soil creep is actually taking place. Right, now let us look at landslide. What causes landslide? We can categorize the causes into physical factors and human factors. But let us look at the physical factors. Anything non-human, for example, the slope is being undercut by a river or the sea. Earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, those can cause landslides, such as this. Heavy rainfall, similar to what we experienced last week with the heavy rains in Jamaica. The steepness of the slope can result in landslides, or when bedding planes are roughly parallel to the surface. Bedding planes are actually layers of rock. So for example, on a slope, a bedding plane parallel to that steep slope will increase the chances of landslides. Now, how do humans contribute to landslide? When we remove vegetation from especially steep slopes, it makes landslides more likely to occur as there are no roots to hold the soil in place. Building on unstable slopes, constructing buildings on unstable slopes will cause strain on the unstable slope, resulting in landslide. Also, undercutting the base of a slope to build roads can also contribute to landslides. Now I want you to think about the results of mass movement. When we have soil creep taking place and landslides taking place, how does this impact on man and the environment? Now, if we look back at what happened with the heavy rainfalls in Jamaica last week, we find that there was one death, there were injuries, and there was most certainly destruction of property, damage to infrastructure such as roads, electricity poles, and so on. So there are many impacts or negative impacts that mass movements such as soil creep and landslide may have on the environment. Now, what can man do to alleviate or to reduce the impacts of soil creep and mass movement? I want you to think about a solution or a strategy to reducing the impacts of soil creep and landslides, and we'll discuss them at our next class.